Should you sell up and get rid of your property portfolio? This is the big question that every investor is asking themselves at the moment, especially with all the recent changes that have come in, including the renters' rights. However, before you make those decisions, which is a very emotional decision, I suggest and really encourage you to review your portfolio in great detail. And that comes from 5 key factors. One is your net cash flow. So what I mean by that is you've got to take into consideration every single cost. We've got to take into consideration mortgage costs, management fees, service charge if it's an apartment, maintenance costs. You've got to take into account every single cost before you make any decisions. However, one thing to be clear on is when you're taking into consideration your net cash flow, so many investors over the years I've heard and have made decisions off the back of 1 or 2 months. 1 or 2 months does not determine your whole portfolio. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to go and get a maintenance cost come in that you think, oh God, suddenly it's not worth it anymore. I've just had to fork out £1,000 for new flooring. However, what you've got to do is you've got to take that £1,000 and divide that over the period of time that the tenant's been in that property. When was the last time you had to lay flooring? Because there's always maintenance with property. However, if you divide the costs and work that out over a longer period, suddenly it can actually become far more worth it. And it's very easy just to look at the last few months and make a decision off the back of that. So use your net cash flow and make it realistic and take into account every number over a longer period of time. Number 2, your return on investment, if it's actually worth it. Using that net cash flow, you've got to look at your return on your investment. And what I mean by that is how much cash you've injected into that property. Again, it's so easy to determine if you're making £300 a month and you look at the purchase price of a, say, £200,000 property, you might think, well, it's not worth it. I'm only making £300 a month. However, you might have only invested £50,000 because you've got a mortgage for the remaining deposit. So it's something in which if you're making £300 a month and you've only invested £50,000, well, then actually it might become worth it. So you've always got to work out your numbers based on the cash that you've injected into that property. And by all means, take into consideration stamp duty, take into consideration a furniture pack, your legal fees, your net cash flow divided by the exact amount that you've injected into that property. That's how to work out. Number 3, your mortgage position. So what I mean by this is work out and determine what is actually left on your mortgage of that property. Because so many times it might not actually be worth selling the property, but it might be worth refinancing and releasing equity out of that property. Or another example is I had a client the other day whose mortgage was due up in a year's time. They wanted to release equity. Now, they got at the peak of interest rates when interest rates were much higher. We've since put him in touch and he's gone over to one of our concierge providers. He's spoken to a mortgage broker and it actually makes more sense to pay a small early redemption fee, an early redemption charge, take out his older mortgage and go into a new mortgage. And he's actually now saving £150 a month based on the newer rates. So you always want to work out your mortgage rate and what it actually works out to be based on where your mortgage position is now, what your interest rates are before you make any decisions on that front. Number 4, your monthly rent. Now, what I mean by this one is so many times it's a case of your monthly rent is actually lower than it should be. Now, with renters' rights, I know people are nervous about putting up and pushing up rents because it's all about justifying the rents and how can you justify it if it's actually allowed and if you're in line with market rate. That's so easy to do. You've just got to look at the comparables, look at what's running in the area. And if your rent is, say, £100 below the market average, then you can increase the rents. Now, as little as £100 might seem, if you've not increased the rents over 3 or 4 years, £100 to the tenant is not going to be be all and end all. If you've not put up the rents in a long period of time, they're going to be absolutely fine with it. They understand that things are going to go up. Everyone's costs have gone up. So don't be worried that your tenants are going to suddenly move out. If you have a nice conversation, you communicate with your tenants and you communicate with your management company, I can assure you that the actual difference in what it makes to you is big, and in terms of it doesn't cause you major issues that you think, because that's one reason that most people don't want to put up the rents. And just remember, £100 a month might not seem a lot. However, that's a £1,200 extra that you're earning and it's in your pocket every single year. That's number 4. Check your monthly rents and see if they're in line with market average. Number 5, and last but not least, opportunity cost. If you do decide to sell that portfolio, where are you going to reallocate the money? Because you've got to remember, by selling the property, you've suddenly lost all the income that you were generating from that property. You've lost all the equity that's building up year on year as the property market moves forward. So you've got to take into consideration that if you do sell, where is that money going to be redeployed? Because the last thing you want to be doing is leave it in the bank, regardless of what your intentions are and what your long-term. And there is so many seagulls that I have to keep pausing this video. What I mean by this is if you're going to sell up that property portfolio, the first 2 things you've got to consider is, one is the fact that you're losing income straight away. So that's income you're not receiving in your pocket. And the second thing is you're losing out on the equity that property is gaining year on year as the market moves forward. So you've got to take into consideration those 2 things. But more importantly, if you're selling up that property, you've got to consider where are you redeploying that equity? Because the last thing you want to be doing is you want to be leaving it in the back. That's the worst thing you can do. So you've got to think and consider, if you're making say 3 or 4% now, what's the opportunity cost? Can you go and redeploy that equity into something that's going to generate you 7 or 8%? If you can, then great. But again, you've got to consider things like stamp duty if you're considering other property, the legal costs and all the purchase costs that go along with that. More often than not, when I've run the numbers with investors, it actually makes more sense to release equity, because most people are sitting on a large chunk of equity than they don't realise, and then redeploying that equity elsewhere. Because as much as that property might not be generating you great yields now, it's still appreciating. And then what you can then do with that new equity, you go and reinvest it in another property that is going to then boost up that income. So that's one thing that we've learned over the years, is that so many times it's not worth selling, it's actually worth releasing equity and going and purchase again. But they're 5 tips that I would recommend that you really consider before you sell any property portfolio. And remember, learn your numbers, know your numbers, and then you can evaluate if it's worth selling or not. And if you found this useful, and even a little bit useful, like and subscribe, because we want to do more of these contents. We want to know that for you guys it's worthwhile. Post in the comments in terms of videos you want to see, any information you want to gain from us, because we're always open to ideas. And more importantly, we want to keep giving you the content that you're looking for. Speak soon.